The mountains don't forgive weakness. That is the first thing a person learns in the high country of Wyoming, and usually the learning comes hard. The wind off the Tetons doesn't care what you've lost or what you were promised or what you believed would happen differently. It comes down through the passes in October with the same indifference it has carried for 10,000 years, and it strips away everything a man has been using to pretend he is fine. Callum Devereaux had been pretending for 3 years. He was 44 years old, still broad across the shoulders, still capable of a full day's work without complaint. He ran a modest cattle operation outside Garnet Falls, a town that barely deserved the name. A post office, a livery, a general store with a woman behind the counter who knew everybody's business before they knew it themselves. The ranch sat at the edge of a long meadow where the grass ran silver in the wind, and the elk came down in the evenings to stand in the tree line like dark thoughts a man couldn't quite shake. He had a dog named Patch. He had a stove that drew poorly on cold mornings. He had a daughter buried on the hill east of the barn, and he had a silence that had filled every room of the house the way water fills a boot, slowly, completely, until you stopped noticing it and just walked heavy. Her name had been Josephine, his wife. She had died 3 years ago in the winter, not from illness or accident, but from the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying grief too long in a body not built to hold it. They had lost a child first, a boy, stillborn in early spring, and Josephine had never found her way back from that. The grief had taken her by degrees, quietly the way frost takes a field. By November of the following year, she was gone. Callum had kept going the way a clock keeps going after the person who wounded it has left the room. Not because he wanted to, just because the mechanism hadn't stopped yet. That was the condition of the man when the wagon came up the road on a Tuesday morning in early October, moving slow and listing slightly to the right, as if one wheel had an argument with the axle. He was at the fence line when he heard it. He didn't look up at first. Garnet Falls was not on the way to anywhere important, and travelers who came out this far usually had a reason that wasn't any of his business. But the wagon stopped at his gate, and then a voice, steady, a little rough from the road, unmistakably a woman traveling alone, called out from the seat. "Is this the Devereaux place?" He looked up then. She was younger than he expected, 26, maybe 27, with dark hair pulled back under a gray traveling hat that had seen better weather. She sat on the wagon seat the way a person sits when they've learned not to trust anything to hold them, straight-backed, both hands on the reins, weight distributed evenly, as if at any moment she might need to move fast. Beside her on the seat was a leather satchel so worn it had gone soft at the corners, and in the wagon bed behind her were 2 trunks, a bedroll, and a wooden crate with a chicken inside it who appeared to be asleep. "Depends who's asking," Callum said. "My name is Beatrix Lund," she said. "My father was Gunnar Lund. He said you'd remember him." Callum came slowly to the gate without opening it. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that has arrived in the wrong season. "Gunnar's dead," he said. "It wasn't a question. Last spring," she said. "Pneumonia. It took him fast. Gunnar Lund." Callum felt the name settle in him like a stone dropped into still water. He had known Gunnar 20 years ago, in the years before the ranch, before Josephine, before any of it. 2 young men pushing cattle through the Powder River Basin for an outfit out of Cheyenne, sleeping in the open under skies so full of stars they felt personal. Gunnar had been the kind of man who was steady in a crisis and laughed too loud around a fire, and always knew which way was north without looking. Callum hadn't seen him in 15 years. "How'd he know where to find me?" Callum asked. "He made it his business to know," Beatrix said, without apology. She reached into the satchel and produced an envelope, sealed and crumpled at one corner. "He wrote you a letter. He asked me to deliver it in person." She paused. "He also said you would probably look at me like I was a problem he'd handed you." "He wasn't wrong," Callum said. "He said to tell you that too." He stood looking at the envelope in her extended hand. The chicken in the crate shifted and muttered to itself. "There's a trough around the side for your horse," he said finally. "Supper's at sundown." He didn't open the gate immediately. He went around and opened it, which was a different thing. Beatrix Lund drove the wagon through without comment. He read the letter at the kitchen table that evening, while she saw to her horse and the wagon and the chicken, which she released into the yard with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she seemed to apply to everything. Gunner's handwriting was large and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself to read past 40 and approached the written word with the respect of a late convert. Callum, if you're reading this, my girl made it to you. Her name is Beatrix. Her mother called her Bea, but she'll correct you if you use it. She is the most capable person I have ever known, and I say that including you and including myself, which is saying something. She has nowhere to go. I want you to understand that plainly. Her husband died 14 months ago, a man named Reston, a decent enough fellow, taken by a horse accident. They had a small place outside Rawlins, but the debt came with the land, and when Reston died, the bank came with it. She has been working since then wherever she could find it. Laundry, cooking, whatever held her. It is no life for a woman with her abilities. I thought of you because you are alone, and because you are honest, and because the ranch you wrote me about some years back sounds like a place that needs someone who knows how to work. I am not asking you to take her in as charity. She would refuse it if you offered it. I am asking you to give her a fair situation, wages, a roof, a season's time to find her footing. After that, she will make her own way. That is her nature. You told me once, the night we camped outside Casey in the rain with nothing dry for a fire, that you hoped you'd end up somewhere that felt like it meant something. I told you that places didn't mean anything. People made them mean something. You said I was wrong? I was not wrong, Callum. I am asking you to let someone help you prove it. Your friend, Gunner Callum, folded the letter. He set it on the table beside the salt cellar and the coffee cup, and the book he'd been trying to finish for 6 months. Outside, he could hear the small sounds of the yard being put in order, the latch of the chicken coop, the pump handle, water moving through the trough. He sat there for a long time. When Beatrix came inside, she knocked twice on the open door before entering, which he noted. She looked at the folded letter on the table, and then at him with an expression that was composed but watchful, the look of a person accustomed to receiving decisions that concerned them without being consulted. I know he had no right, she said before he could speak. He didn't. I told him that. Before he died, I told him sending me somewhere uninvited was not. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. He said you were a man who needed to be pushed. He was right about that too, Callum said. She looked at him directly. I want to be clear about what I'm asking for. Not charity, not a room out of pity. Fair wages for fair work, a season's duration, and the option to stay or go at the end of it depending on how things stand. That's all. What kind of work can you do? She looked at him the way a schoolteacher looks at a student who has asked something beneath the level of the class. I can mend fence. I can cook. I can drive a wagon, manage livestock, keep accounts, and I delivered 2 calves last spring without assistance when the man who was supposed to help didn't show up. She paused. I also sew, if that matters, though I can't imagine it will. Callum looked at his hands on the table. Back room off the kitchen, he said. Stove in there draws better than the one out here. Breakfast before dawn if you want to eat with me. I don't keep late hours. Neither do I. He stood up. He started toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame in the way a man stops when there's something left to say that he hasn't decided how to say yet. One thing, he said without turning. There's a grave on the hill east of the barn. I go up there Sunday mornings. I go alone. I don't discuss it, and I don't explain it. I just need you to know it's there. A pause. All right, Beatrix said simply. He went outside. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the folded letter still on the table, the one her father had written and she had not read. She did not open it. But she looked at it for a long time, and she understood, without needing the words, that the man who had just walked out that door was carrying something heavier than a season's worth of grief. She knew the weight of it because she had carried a version of it herself. The first 2 weeks were functional. That was the most accurate word for it. Beatrix was up before he was, which surprised him the first morning and stopped surprising him by the third. She had assessed the kitchen's shortcomings with what seemed like a single unhurried glance and reorganized it in ways that turned out to be improvements, though he would not have admitted this if asked. The pantry that had been a chaos of poorly sealed tins and forgotten sacks became a system. The bread that appeared on Thursday was better than any bread that had existed in that house in 3 years. She took on the fence line along the north pasture without being asked. Not the patch-and-pray approach Callum had been applying for 2 seasons, but a real repair. Posts pulled and reset, wire run true, corners reinforced. He rode up the second day to check it and stood at the fence for a while without saying anything, because there was nothing to say that the fence didn't already say. He watched her the way you watch an unfamiliar weather system moving across the valley, with attention and with the awareness that you don't yet know what it will bring. She wasn't a storm. She was something quieter than that. She was the kind of presence that made you aware gradually of how loud the absence had been. They didn't talk much. He asked about the work. She answered in specifics. She asked about the land, the water table, which pastures flooded in spring where the elk crossed, and he answered the same way. They built something out of practical exchange and let it be only that, and neither of them reached past it. On the 11th day, Callum was cutting through the south meadow on horseback when his mare shied at something in the long grass. A jackrabbit, nothing, and put him on the ground fast and hard, left shoulder taking most of it. He lay there for a moment with the sky pressing down above him and the grass smelling cold and clean around his face and his body running a quiet inventory of damage. He heard hooves, then footsteps. Beatrix appeared above him, crouching, unhurried, with the particular calm of someone who has handled emergencies often enough to have stopped performing urgency. "Can you sit up?" He could. "Move your arm." He did with some difficulty. "Shoulder," she said. "Not the joint. The muscle below it. You'll be useless tomorrow." She was already looking at his head. "Did you hit anything harder than the grass?" "No." "Then you're not broken. You're just inconvenient." She helped him to his feet. He didn't exactly resist and didn't exactly accept it. "Your mare's 20 yards east. She looks embarrassed." He almost laughed. He turned it into a cough. "I've been riding alone for 3 years," he said. "I know," she said. She handed him the reins when he was steady. "You've been doing most things alone for 3 years." "I can see it in how the ranch runs." She said it without judgment, as simple observation. "It's harder than it has to be." He rode back without much to say about that. That evening she made a poultice for his shoulder without asking his permission or his preference, set it on the table beside his supper, and went to her room. He used it. He didn't mention it in the morning, and neither did she. But something had shifted in the quality of the silence between them, and they both knew it, and neither of them said that either. It was a fire that started it, a small one built in the stone ring outside the house on a clear Friday evening when the temperature had dropped and the stars were coming up thick and bright over the ridge. Callum had been sitting with it for the better part of an hour when he heard the back door and her footsteps on the dry ground. She didn't ask if she could sit. She sat on the other side of the ring and looked up at the sky the way someone looks at something familiar in a foreign place. Recognition tinged with distance. After a while she said, "My father used to say that the dark between stars was just the space where the light hadn't arrived yet." "Sounds like Gunnar," Callum said. He had a lot of theories about things that couldn't argue back. Callum looked at the fire. The wood cracked and settled. "He talked about you," he said. "In the years when we were still writing, he said you were the one who kept the books for that little operation he had outside Lander. Said you'd caught an accounting error that would have put him under." "He caught it," she said. "I just pointed." "He said you pointed with some force." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He was proud in the way men are proud of things they had no part in building. He didn't make me capable. He just didn't make me less capable, which is more than most fathers manage." Callum looked across the fire at her. She was watching the flames with an expression that was complicated in the way that expressions are when a person is letting themselves feel something they've kept folded up for a while. "Where would you have gone?" he asked. "If not here," she considered it honestly. "North, maybe. I had a lead on work in Sheridan, a hotel needing someone who could manage the kitchen accounts, respectable enough." She paused. "But my father was dying and he asked me to come here first. And she stopped. She looked at the fire. "I was tired of going north because it was the practical option. I didn't want to keep choosing things because they made sense." Callum said nothing for a long moment. "What did you want to choose?" he said. She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was quiet and straightforward, the way she said the things that mattered. "I wanted to stop somewhere that felt like it was worth the stopping." He looked back at the fire. Something moved in his chest. Not the old grief, which he knew intimately, but something adjacent to it. Something with the quality of a door that had been closed so long he'd forgotten he'd closed it, reminding him now with the gentlest possible pressure that doors were meant to open. He didn't say goodnight when he went inside, but he stayed at the fire longer than he'd intended. Think about what she said. She didn't say she was looking for love or safety or rescue. She said she was looking for somewhere worth the stopping. That's a different thing entirely. That's the kind of wanting that comes after you've had the other things and lost them, and decided that what you needed was something more true. I know something about that kind of looking. They rode into Garnet Falls together on the 1st of November for supplies. Callum had been mildly dreading it. Small towns had long memories and quick arithmetic, and the arithmetic of a woman living on a widower's ranch had only one answer, as far as most people in Garnet Falls were concerned. He could feel the consideration as they tied the horses outside Pendleton's store, the look from the men outside the livery, the careful glance from the minister's wife on the boardwalk. Not hostile, just measuring. Inside, Ada Pendleton behind the counter gave Beatrix the kind of assessment that women in small towns give to unknown quantities, thorough, rapid, and concealed behind the business of checking the order list. It was outside that the trouble found them. A man named Dowell Crisp, who ran a middling spread south of town and had the self-important bearing of a man who'd never once been told he was wrong, was standing by the horses when they came out. He looked at Beatrix with an expression Callum recognized, the particular measuring look of a man deciding whether to say something he shouldn't. He said it. "You, the Devereaux woman?" He said it with the tone that made the phrase mean something other than the words. Callum stopped. He felt Beatrix go still beside him, not with fear but with the controlled stillness of a person who has heard this before and has learned to wait. He turned to Dowell with the quietness that is not peace. "She's the best ranch hand between here and Cody," Callum said, "and she's standing with me. So you're going to step back from my horses and let us load our supplies." Dowell looked at him for a moment, running the math on whether this was worth it. It wasn't. He stepped back. They loaded the wagon without another word from anyone. On the road home, the silence between them was warmer than usual, and neither of them named it. "You didn't have to do that," Beatrix said after a mile or so. "Yes, I did," Callum said. She looked at him. "Why?" He kept his eyes on the road ahead, the long gold meadow grass on either side, the mountains going purple in the late afternoon. "Because it was accurate," he said, "and because some things need to be said where people can hear them." She turned back to the road, but he could see at the edge of his vision that she was holding back something that might have been a smile. It was the accounts ledger that changed things the second time. On a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks later, Callum came into the kitchen to find Beatrix at the table with the ranch's account books spread before her. The ones he'd been keeping, badly, he was aware, in a system that had devolved over 3 years of a man who didn't much care what the numbers said. She had not gone looking for them. He'd asked her to find the tally from the fall cattle sale, and she'd found the ledger, and then apparently could not stop herself from seeing what was in it. She looked up when he came in. She didn't apologize. "You're owed money from the Carmichael outfit," she said, "from last spring. The tally is wrong by 14 head." He sat down across from her. "I know. Did you follow up on it?" "Not yet." She looked at him with an expression that stopped somewhere short of exasperation. "Callum, it's November. I know what month it is. You're also overpaying on your winter feed contract by about 12%. The prices have shifted since this was set, and whoever wrote this contract did you no favors." She turned the ledger to face him and pointed. "Here and here." He looked at the columns. She had annotated them in a precise, careful hand, each discrepancy marked and explained in the margins. "You should be doing this," he said slowly, "instead of mending fence." "A person can do both," she said. She looked at the ledger and then at him. "The fence matters. But this," she gestured at the books, "this is where the ranch either survives or it doesn't. And you haven't been paying attention to it." "No," he said, "I haven't." She looked at him steadily. "Do you want to?" He looked at the ledger. He looked at her handwriting in the margins, neat and certain, making order out of his neglect. He thought about the 3 years of not caring what the numbers said, of running the ranch like a man who wasn't sure how much longer he intended to be there. "Yes," he said. It surprised him, the word. It came out without deliberation. She turned the ledger back. "Then let's start with the Carmichael account." That evening she gave him a sketch. She drew, he had discovered, not the way some women drew, as an ornament, but with a draftsman's precision and an artist's patience. She had been making sketches of the ranch since the second week without comment on them, and he'd seen her working by lamplight with a small journal and a graphite pencil, though he hadn't seen the results until she set one on the table beside his coffee cup. It was the front gate. But the way she had drawn it, it wasn't just a gate. It was the gate at the particular angle of late afternoon light, the shadow it threw long and specific across the frozen ground, the latch that had been stiff since September, rendered with such exactness that he could feel the resistance of it in his palm, just looking at the drawing. And in the background, barely suggested but unmistakably there, the hill east of the barn, with the old cottonwood that grew crooked to the east, as if the wind had been pushing it for so long it had decided to just go that direction. He looked at it for a long time. "You drew the tree," he said finally. "It's part of what's there," she said simply. He said nothing for a moment. "You see everything." "I try to draw what's actually there," she said, "not what I think should be there." He set the drawing down carefully. Not like paper, but like something that could be damaged. "Could you?" he started. He stopped. He tried again. "Would you draw something else? When you have time. What would you want?" He was quiet for a moment. "The hill," he said, "east of the barn." She looked at him without surprise. She picked up her pencil. "I'll need a few days," she said. 3 days later, he found it on the table. The hill at dawn, the light just breaking over the ridge, the old cottonwood throwing its crooked shadow, and at the foot of the tree indicated with the lightest possible touch, a stone marker, small, almost hidden in the long grass, drawn with enough clarity that it was clearly there but not so prominently that it dominated the composition. She had seen it. She had put it in. She had not made it the subject, only part of what was true. He sat with the drawing for a long time before he realized his eyes were wet. That night she wasn't at supper. He found her outside at the stone ring, knees drawn up, looking at the ridge, her face doing something she usually kept private. Beatrix. She looked up. She wiped her eyes once, briefly, without embarrassment. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something my father didn't put in his letter." He sat across from her on the bench. The night was cold and clear, the stars the same ones Gunnar used to point out by name on the Powder River 20 years ago. "There's a man named Aldous Crane," she said. "He has a claim adjacent to property east of Garnet Falls. He approached me in Rawlins before I came here. He'd heard I was looking for a situation. He told me that a widow without a fixed position in Wyoming territory has no standing in any land or wage dispute if a property owner decided to contest it." She looked at the fire ring, where no fire burned. "He told me I had until the end of the season to find a formal employment situation with documentation, or he'd argue to the county that my presence on any ranch was a vagrancy matter. Callum said nothing. He waited. "He wants this land," she said. "I think he knew my father had directed me here. I think he's been waiting to see if I'd establish anything that could complicate his claim on the eastern parcel." She looked up. Her voice was steady and level, and something underneath it was very tired. "My father didn't tell you any of this. I know why he didn't." "Why?" "Because he wanted you to let me stay because you wanted to," she said. "Not because I was someone else's problem you felt obligated to solve. There it is. That's the part that stops me every time I think about this story. A dying man with enough breath left to write one letter chose to trust rather than to explain. That's not naivety. That's faith in someone he knew well enough to believe in. I'm not sure I could have done the same." Callum was quiet for a long time. He looked at the dark ridge and the crooked cottonwood against the stars. "How long until the end of the season?" he asked. 2 weeks. He nodded slowly. He stood. "Go inside," he said. "It's too cold to sit out here without a fire." She went. He stayed, standing, looking at the hill east of the barn in the dark, where the stone marker was invisible but present. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark until around 3 in the morning, when he stopped refusing to look at the thing he'd been not looking at for weeks. He went through it carefully, the way he went through the account ledger now, line by line, honest about the numbers. He was not ready for her to leave. That was the beginning. It wasn't gratitude, though there was that. It wasn't obligation to Gunnar, though that had started it. It wasn't pity. And it wasn't loneliness in the simple sense of the word. It was something that had accumulated in the daily exchange of practical things. In the accounts corrected and the fence repaired, in the evening by the fire and the drawing of the hill. It was the way she knocked twice before entering. It was the way she said, "I try to draw what's actually there," and meant it as a philosophy as much as a method. He had spent 3 years as a man who had stopped wanting things. He had settled into it, the not wanting. He had told himself it was peace. Lying in the dark, he admitted to himself that it had not been peace. It had been avoidance wearing peace's clothes, and he was done with it. The next morning he rode to Garnet Falls alone. He went to the county recorder's office and asked about Aldous Crane's claim. The recorder confirmed it, then added, quietly, in the manner of a man who had opinions about Crane, that a formal employment contract with a notarized signature would establish standing for a working party on any contested property. He also mentioned, with careful neutrality, that a marriage record would do the same. Callum rode home slow, the way you ride when you're thinking rather than traveling. He found her at the gate she'd repaired, checking the corner post in the cold morning light, her breath making small clouds in the air. "Beatrix," he said. She turned. She looked at him the way she looked at the fence, assessing, honest, ready for whatever the truth turned out to be. "I rode into town this morning," he said. "I talked to the county recorder. I see there are 2 options for dealing with Crane's claim." He stayed on the horse for a moment, then thought better of that and got down. He stood on the other side of the gate from her, which was not how he'd intended this to go, but then he hadn't planned it carefully, and he had promised himself he was done with avoidance. "A formal employment contract is one of them." She waited. "I'm not offering that," he said. A pause. Her expression was controlled and very careful. "The other option," he said, "is that I would like you to stay. Not for the season, not as a—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. He looked at her. "I have not said something like this to anyone since Josephine. I'm aware it comes out badly. But I've been alone for 3 years, and I've been pretending that was a choice instead of a defeat, and somewhere in the last 8 weeks I stopped being able to pretend it." He paused. "I don't know what I'm offering except this ranch and my full attention, and the honest intention to see you clearly for however long you'll allow it." "I know that's not Callum," she said. He stopped. She looked at him for a long moment, not with surprise, with the same patience she brought to everything that mattered. "My father knew," she said softly. "Yes, stubborn old man, the stubbornest I ever knew." He paused. "Until recently." Something in her face shifted. "Not a performance. just the quiet rearrangement of a person who had been holding something in reserve and was now deciding whether to set it down. "I told myself I wasn't going to let this happen," she said. "I came here for work, a season, a fair wage, and then on to the next thing. That's what I told myself." "I know. I don't know what I am to you," she said. "I'm not your wife, not yet. And I'm not Gunner's daughter the way I've been everyone's daughter. That's not a role I'll carry. I need you to know that." "I know that," he said. "You're Beatrix Lund. That's the whole of what I'm asking." She looked at him for a long time. The wind came through the meadow grass with its cold Wyoming voice, and the horses stood patient in the early light, and somewhere up on the hill east of the barn, the old cottonwood made its slow, crooked stand against the wind. "Ask me properly," she said, he asked her. Not on one knee, neither of them were built for that, but standing at the gate in the plain morning light, his hat in his hands, asking without ornamentation because he had learned in the last 3 years that ornamentation was what you used when you weren't sure of the thing itself. "I'm not easy," he said. "I'm quiet and set in my habits, and I've made an art out of not needing anything, which turns out to be harder to undo than I expected. I can't tell you I'm the man I was before. I don't think I am. But I can tell you that the person I'm becoming, the one who looks at the account books now and actually cares, and who left a fire burning longer than necessary because the company was good, and who has been watching the hill east of the barn differently these last weeks, that person is asking you, and he means it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was Beatrix Lund and could not leave a thing only partially addressed. "But we renegotiate the feed contract before the wedding. The 12% is unreasonable." Aldous Crane came on a Monday with a county man and a document he intended to present like a verdict. Callum was at the barn. Beatrix was at the kitchen table with the account books. Crane walked past Callum without acknowledgement, which was information. "Miss Lund," Crane said, coming to the kitchen door, "I've filed with the county. Your situation here." "Her situation here," Callum said from directly behind him, "is that she's agreed to marry me, and we filed our intention with the county recorder last Thursday. So whatever you've filed against a woman who has full standing on this property." Crane turned. He assessed the situation with the look of a man recalculating his odds in real time. "The Devereaux ranch doesn't border my claim," he said, retreating. "No," Callum agreed, "it doesn't. And the eastern parcel you've been eyeing belongs to a man named Bernard Okafor, who I rode out to see last week, and he's aware of your interest now, so I'd encourage you to reassess the value of that particular ambition." The county man looked at the ground. Crane folded the document. They left. Beatrix was standing in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Callum with an expression he was beginning to recognize, the one that held amusement and assessment and something warmer in approximately equal parts. "Bernard Okafor," she said, "his family's been on that land for 20 years. He's not interested in selling, and you just happened to ride out and tell him someone was interested in his property. Seemed like something a neighbor ought to know." She looked at him for a moment. "You planned that?" "I made a few stops," he said. She turned back to the kitchen. "The feed contract renegotiation starts this afternoon," she said. "Don't think I've forgotten." He hadn't. They were married in Garnet Falls in November at the small courthouse, with Ada Pendleton as witness, who, as it turned out, had been quietly hoping for it since the morning she'd watched Callum stand up to Dowell Crisp in the street. Small towns keep track of things. They keep track of who stands up and who steps back, and they make their judgments accordingly. The ranch changed after that. Not suddenly, gradually, the way light changes in early spring, barely perceptible day by day, and then one morning you look out and everything is different. The accounts were in order. The feed contract was renegotiated. A second chicken appeared in the coop. The account ledger acquired a second handwriting, decisive and exact, and the ranch began to run the way it was meant to run, with 2 people paying attention to all the things one person had been letting slip. The Sunday mornings, Callum still went to the hill alone. He had said as much, and she had understood, and she honored it without discussion. But one Sunday in late February, she was at the fence near the base of the hill when he came down, and she didn't make anything of it or step away as if she'd been caught. She was just there, fixing the same post she'd fixed in October, in the way that good people return to things that matter. He stopped beside her. He stood looking up at the hill for a while. "Her name was Josephine," he said. It was the first time he had said her name to anyone since the burial. Beatrix didn't say anything. She kept her hand on the post. She was just there. "She would have liked you," he said. She was practical. She had no patience for pretense. Beatrix looked up at the hill. What was she like in the mornings? It startled him, the specificity of it. He thought about it honestly. "Better than me," he said. "Up early and already certain about the day before I'd opened my eyes." "That sounds exhausting," Beatrix said. He almost laughed. He let it, this time quietly, into the cold February air. In March, she told him. At the kitchen table, over the account books, in the plain, straightforward way, she told him everything that mattered. He set down the pencil. He sat for a moment with the news settling into him, making space for itself, in rooms he'd thought would stay empty. He stood up. He crossed the kitchen. He took her hands and held them, not dramatically, not with the words that would have come out wrong anyway, but in the particular way that a person holds something they had believed was gone from them and had stopped letting themselves grieve because the grief was too large to survive. Outside, the snow was melting off the lower meadow. The creek was running again after the winter silence. The old cottonwood on the hill east of the barn was putting out the first small tight buds that meant it had survived another season, as it had survived all the seasons before, bending to the wind and holding to the ground and simply, stubbornly continuing. The hardest thing. I've thought about this a long time. Not the dangerous things, not the physical things. I mean the hardest thing a person can do who has been hurt the way grief hurts you. It's this: to stop protecting the wound by calling the protection wisdom. Callum Devereaux did that. So did Beatrix Lund. And somewhere, I believe, Gunnar Lund knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote that letter and sealed it and put it in his daughter's capable hands and trusted the rest to two stubborn people who needed each other and didn't know it yet. Thank you for riding with me today. Wherever you are in this world, I'm glad you were here.